So, since I'm on a roll today, um, we're going to continue. We're going to read chapter 3 of The 13 Clocks by James Thurber. Let's see what what I recall. This is a cold reading. I just am here, and I thought I've got the book here. We were getting ready for guests, and we had our floors done, so we had to move the bookshelves. 3 big bookshelves that are frankly falling apart. And I found this book, and it reminded me that it was supposed to be an interesting book. James Thurber is an interesting character, author. So anyway, we've got the king or the duke. I don't remember the whole story, so you'll have to look at chapters 1 and 2 and see what I remembered. So you've got a duke with one eye. Let's see what I can remember. He's got a cold heart. Everything he touches turns cold. He doesn't want to have emotions. He doesn't want to live in the present because he's afraid he's going to get a little twist in his heart, which might warm his heart. He lives with his niece in his castle. His niece is the opposite. She's warm to everything. She's roughly 21 or something, and the Duke supposedly wants to marry her off. But whenever someone comes to ask for her hand, he gives them impossible tasks like lasso the moon or make the shore come a mile closer in every night or something crazy. What else? He's got one short leg, or you could say one leg longer than the other, as he prefers to call it. And if you say it wrong, he runs you through with a sword. There is a prince who's dressed up as a jester, and he's come upon the castle and has heard the story about the Duke. And he says, I'm going to go in there, and he's going to win the niece's hand. And so that's where we were. He was in a tavern, and now I think he's been captured by the king's guards, and they're bringing him into the castle. So, chapter 3 of the 13 Clocks. It was morning. The cold Duke gazed out a window of the castle. Now, I haven't read this, so this may be a little difficult. As if he were watching flowers in bloom or flying birds, he was watching his varlets feeding whisper to the geese. He turned away and the Duke also likes to torture animals or something. He turned away and took 3 limps and stared at the minstrel standing in the great hall of the castle, both hands bound behind him. What manner of prince is this that you speak of? And what manner of maiden does he love, to use a word that makes no sense and has no point? His voice sounded like iron dropped on velvet. A noble prince, a noble lady, the minstrel said. When they are wed, 1,000,000 people will be glad. The Duke took his sword out of his sword cane and stared at him. He's ready to run him through. He limped across and faced his captive and touched his google softly with the point and touched his zatch and sighed and frowned and put the sword away. So the Duke slits suitors from Google to Zatch, whatever the heck that is. We shall think of some amusing task for you to do, he said. I do not like your tricks and guile. I think there is no prince or maiden who would wed if I should slay you. But I am neither sure nor certain. He grinned and said again, well, think of some amusing task for you. We'll think of some amusing task for you to do. But I am not a prince, the minstrel said, and only princes may aspire to Saralinda's hand. That's her name. The cold Duke kept on grinning. Why then, we'll make you a prince. We'll make a prince of you. The prince of rags and jingles. I almost said jiggles. He clapped his gloves together, and 2 varlets appeared without a word or sound. Take him to his dungeon, said the Duke. Feed him water without bread, and bread without water. Water without bread and bread without water. Sounds like water and bread. The varlets were taking the minstrel out of the great hall when down the marble stairs the princess Saralinda floated like a cloud. The Duke's eye gleamed like crystal. The minstrel gazed in wonder. The Princess Saralinda was tall, with freesias in her dark hair, and she wore serenity brightly like the rainbow. It was not easy to tell her mouth from the rose, or her brow from the white lilac. Her voice was faraway music, and her eyes were candles burning on a tranquil night. She moved across the room like wind in violets, and her laughter sparkled on the air, which, from her presence, gained a faint and undreamed fragrance. The prince was frozen by her beauty, but not cold, and the Duke, who was cold but not frozen, held up the palms of his gloves as if she were a fire at which to warm his hands. The minstrel saw the blood come warmly to the lame man's cheeks. This thing of rags and tags and tatters will play our little game, he told his niece, his voice like iron on velvet. I wish him well, the princess said. She's really quite lovely. Here, I hope this doesn't get me in trouble. There's Saralinda. Saralinda. Like Barbarossa. Saralinda. Right? She's gorgeous. The minstrel broke his bonds and took her hand in his, but it was slashed away by the swift cane of the Duke. Take him to his dungeon now, he said. He stared coldly at the minstrel through his monocle. You'll find the most amusing bats and spiders there. I wish him well, the princess said again, and the varlets took the minstrel to his dungeon. When the great iron door of the dungeon clanked behind the minstrel, he found himself alone in darkness. A spider swinging on a strand of web swung back and forth. The zickering of bats was echoed by the walls. The minstrel took a step, avoiding snakes, and something squirmed. Take care, the Gulak said. You're on my foot. Why are you here? The minstrel cried. I forgot something. I forgot about the task the Duke will set you. The minstrel thought of swimming lakes too wide to swim, of turning liquids into stone, or finding boneless creatures made of bone. How came you here, he asked, and can you leave? I never know, the Gorlak said. My mother was a witch, but rather mediocre in her way. When she tried to turn a thing to gold, it turned to clay. And when she changed her rivals into fish, all she got was mermaids. The minstrel's heart was insecure. My father was a My father was a wizard, said his friend, who often cast his spells upon himself when he was in his cups. Strike a light or light a lantern. Something I have hold of has no head. So the Gulaks is another part of the story. He was someone who met the minstrel / prince and told him, you're going to need help, but everything I say is backward. That's what you might have noticed that. The minstrel shuddered. The task, he said, you came to tell me. So the Gulaks is trying to help him. That's why he got himself landed in prison. I did? Oh yes, my father lacked the power of concentration, and that is bad for monks and priests, and worse for wizards. Listen, tell the Duke that you will hunt the boar, or travel thrice around the moon, or turn November into June. Implore him not to send you out to find 1,000 jewels. Ah, it's a trick. And then he'll send you out to find 1,000 jewels. See, I told you it was a trick. But I am poor, the minstrel cried. Come, come, the Gulak said. You're Zorn of Zorna. I had it from a traveler I met. It came to him as he was leaving town. Your father's casks and coffers shine with rubies and with sapphires. So the Gulaks knows that the minstrel / prince is actually a prince. And so he must have some money. So he thinks. My father lives in Zorna, said the prince, and it would take me 9 and 90 days and 3 and 30 days to go. and 3 and 30 days to come back. That's 60 and 6 and 60. It always takes my father 3 and 30 days to make decisions, said the prince. In spells and labors, a certain time is always set, and I might be at sea while mine expires. So he doesn't think that there's not enough time to go to his father, get the money, and come back. That's another problem for another day, the Gulak said. Time is for dragonflies and angels. The former live too little, and the latter live too long. Okay. Zorn of Zorna thought a while and said, wait, so the prince's actually name is Zorn of Zorna. The task seems strange and simple. There are no jewels, the Gulak said, within the reach and ranges of this island, except the gems here in this castle. The Duke knows not that you are Zorn of Zorna. He thinks you are a minstrel without a penny or a moonstone. He's fond of jewels. You've seen them in his gloves, on his gloves. The prince stepped on a turtle. Oh, that's right, there's snakes and spiders and I guess a turtle in the dungeon. The Duke has spies, he said, who may know who I am. The Gulak sighed. I may be wrong, but we must risk and try it. The prince sighed in his turn. I wish you could be sure. I wish I could, the Gulak said. My mother was born, and I regret to say, only partly in a cowl. I've saved a score of princes in my time. I cannot save them all. Owl. So call. Partly in a call. I cannot save them all. Something that would have been in purple if there had been light to see it, scuttled across the floor. The Duke might give me only 30 days or 42 to find 1,000 jewels, said Zorn of Zorna. Why should he give me 99? The way I figure it, the Gulak said, is this. The longer the labor lasts, the longer lasts his gloating. He loves to gloat, you know. The prince sat down beside a toad. My father may have lost his jewels, he said, or given them away. I thought of that, the Gulak said, but I have other plans than the one. Right now we have to sleep. They found a corner without creatures and slept until the clock struck midnight hour. The midnight hour. Chains clanked and rattled, and the great iron door began to move. The Duke has sent for you again, the Gulak said. Be careful what you say and what you do. The great iron door began to open slowly. When shall I see you next? Zorn whispered. There was no answer. The prince groped around in the dark and felt a thing very like a cat, and touched the thing without a head. But he could not find the Gulaks. The great iron door was open, wide, and the dungeon filled with lantern light. The Duke commands your presence, growled a guard. What was that? What was what? I do not know, said the guard. I thought I heard the sound of someone laughing. Is the Duke afraid of laughing? Asked the prince. The Duke is not afraid of anything, not even the total. The total? The total. What's the total? About $4.52. What's the total? About four. Okay, never mind. What's the total? The lock of the guard. That was I put that in there. That's not part of the story. The lock of the guard's hair turned white, and his teeth began to chatter. The total looks like a blob of glup, he said. It makes a sound like rabbits screaming and smells of old unopened rooms. It's waiting for the Duke to fail in some endeavor, such as setting you a task that you can do. I think there's a dragon involved in this. That might be the dragon. And if he sets me one, and I succeed, the prince inquired, the blob will gulp him, said the guard. It's an agent of the devil sent to punish evildoers for having done less than they should. I talk too much. Come on, the Duke is waiting. And that's the end of chapter 3. So what happened? the prince, whose name is actually Zorn of Zorna, gets thrown into the dungeon while the Duke figures out a task for him to do. He passes Sarah Linda, who's gorgeous, and says, I don't know what she said, good luck to you. Then he gets thrown into the prison cell, the dungeon, and he gets and he meets up with the Gulaks again, and they concoct a plan to ask for 99 days to get 1,000 jewels or something like that. And that's where we are. So let's hope that you stuck around for 15 full minutes for that story, and stay tuned for chapter 4 in this Advent season. That was a reading of the 13 clocks, and that's probably backwards because it looks backwards to me. Let's ask all the saints to pray for us. Pray for the souls in purgatory.